Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today on the line, we've got Steve Cominski. He's the host of Baked and Awake. He's also an independent contractor for a 502 legal producer processor in Washington. He's going to be on the line with us to talk about the ins and outs of cultivation, what's going to happen down the road. There's a lot of consolidation and failures in the industry, as well as some interest from Molson Coors. Berkshire Hathaway has a ton of cash that they're going to need to do something with. If you haven't heard, Heinz is already in the cannabis industry. That's one company that Warren Buffett owns. So jumping into some of this conspiracy issues and what's going to happen, Steve Cominski, thanks for being on the Talking Hedge.
Good to be hanging out with you, Josh. Thanks.
So for people who haven't heard about Baked and Awake, it's been around for a couple of years. That's a lifetime in this industry. What is it that you do? What do you talk about? Just give me a little synopsis on who you are.
Sure, thanks. And of course, you will know this. We've been acquainted for a couple of years ourselves in the local industry here. Started the podcast, though, as an independent project. Been working in I-502 more or less as an independent rep since the industry, launched here in 2014 and started Baked and Awake in 2017. When I tell people the elevator pitch for the podcast, I say it's about cannabis, conspiracies, and you. And try to do a relatively serious show. We do have fun. And I track on major cannabis topics, sometimes industry specific to Washington State, but sometimes more in like the national and wider international general interest sense, just the overall cannabis landscape, And, but also as mentioned, a lot of just what I think are pretty unique and interesting topics that I would call conspiracies for lack of a better label, right? Because that's what we...
Sure, who doesn't like to get baked and start talking about mud flood conspiracies?
That's exactly right, bro. You got it. That's right. See, you just mellow out, open your mind, and I'll tell you a story.
I have my own story. My hypothesis or conspiracy theory about the industry is that what we're seeing on 420 for sales is going to be 2 to 3 years down the road normal prices. And likewise, during harvest season, when you see 1 million grams of flash frozen product being sold for 7 to 8 cents per gram, that's the future harvest season prices. Yep. So when you have the top 4 publicly traded Canadian companies trying to get $1.74 per gram, all it's going to take is Mexico's legalization to force the U.S. to come on board, and that's going to squeeze all of those publicly traded companies to have to either go through a bankruptcy liquidation process and liquidate their property, plant, and equipment and all their licenses and everything, because they're not going to be able to compete.
I agree. That's why I love talking to you, bro, because you have that full context. You have that full perspective. That prediction about 420 sales, about 710 specials, and the crazy prices that go along with that each year. Croptober here in Washington State is what we were just talking about. Millions of grams of flash frozen product that's frankly not bad and works well for most purposes, for most folks, most of the frickin' time, yeah. Right? And especially if you're a retailer who's looking to sling, sub $20 eighths all day long and $6 grams to customers all day long and still be able to put them on sale and employ loyalty programs and discounts on top of that practically every time people walk in the door. You and I both visit retail shops. They widely practice those kind of very fun for the end consumer, but very rough on the producers and processors who are selling them product to their profit margins type of pricing schemes. But this isn't going away. It's not changing, is it? It's going the direction that you described, not the other way. Prices aren't coming back around, guys.
So some of the deals that I'm seeing from Uncle Likes, they sent me a text on the...
There you go. Perfect bellwether for this too, because they're a big loss leader, a big strong retailer. Yep.
So you can see a $1 joints, $1 candies, $10 dabs, $12 eighths. I never pay more than $30 for an ounce. And so those deals are going to scare a lot of people.
Yep.
So there's been a lot of discussion about the total demand in the cannabis market, the trends in consumer and product preferences, and how policies are being shaped by business opportunities often overlooked as the status of cannabis supply throughout the United States. So this article goes on to say that its forthcoming report from the U.S. cannabis cultivation output estimates, New Frontier data is providing cultivation output estimates for each state, differentiating between legal and illicit cultivation. And that's important because the illicit market is the legacy market. It's been around for a while. And so there's a lot of talk about, oh, how the black market is taking away sales. It's the other way around. The regulated market is taking away from black market. And you need to have products that aren't moldy, that, with concentrate that's worth buying. And if you have crummy product, no one's going to want to buy it. And that was the issue last year when Canada went legal. You had moldy flower or, just not the right terpene profiles with concentrate that was dirty or black, that the amber color people are looking for. And so when you have low quality and high prices, guess what? People are going to go back to their trusted market, which is their friend growing medical or illicit cannabis.
Wait, is this 2014 in Washington State again you're describing right here?
Yes.
Because, we had poop soup in the stores in 2014, and it was selling for $30 a gram in 2014. And we had Narfi hilarious weed that was also preposterously overpriced. And what did people do? They resoundingly didn't show up in the numbers that the producers and processors expected them to at all. And, of course, meanwhile, Washington State was also triple dipping in taxes on producers and processors at that time. And that almost, I wouldn't say it was going to cripple the industry permanently because none of us thought it was going to last forever. And luckily they did fix that. About 18 months or more before they revised the tax codes in Washington State. It was closer to 2 years by the time all is said and done.
It's pretty scary how competitive it is when you go to North Seattle up Aurora, Highway 99, and you get to 20, 25 dispensaries within a 5-mile radius, and some of them literally sharing the same parking lot side by side without
and all
having
of them
vertical
doing deals.
Yeah, you don't have that option of vertically integrated, right? So a retailer can't own the producer processor, making it incredibly competitive. And it's only a matter of time when California comes on board and you're able to export Oregon 6.5 years oversupply. A lot of these companies are either going to consolidate or be forced to consolidate and have capitulation. So this article goes on to say that most supply updates only look at the legal markets, but the new report provides a total volume of being cultivated in the U.S. with, quote, output being produced in the U.S. staggering, particularly in California, end quote. The total amount produced in the U.S. in 2019 is estimated to reach almost 23 million pounds, while California amounts for roughly 58% of all cannabis cultivation in the U.S. Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and Florida round out the top 5 producing states. And every year just kind of keeps going up with the illicit and legal total cannabis cultivation output. And that doesn't even count with hemp. So a lot of these cultivators for cannabis switch to hemp. And I don't even think that the Oregon growers are aware that 200,000 pounds came out of the ground 2 weeks ago, and another 600,000 pounds are scheduled to come out of the ground, which is going to drastically affect the market.
Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, it's like we were talking about earlier, it's only going one direction. It's not coming back the other way. Like anybody who thinks that they can keep on going, spending $4 and $5 a gram to grow their flower of any kind. All right. And I'm switching modes ever so slightly by referring back to THC marijuana as opposed to the hemp example you just gave there. It applies in both cases just exactly the same way. There are certain hard costs to cultivation. If you're indoor, you're going to spend $2 to $3 to even $4 a gram to grow your flower in most circumstances in our market in Washington State. Our market greatly resembles most of the other legal markets. That is to say, markets of opportunity where the producers and processors are sort of under the necks of landlords and the state on the one hand, product suppliers and helpers to them in the day-to-day operation. That is to say, biggest costs are probably nutrition and lighting, HVAC being a close third. Your utilities are bonkers. And then obviously you need to deliver compliant, clean, decent quality product to the retailers who are far fewer in number than the producers and processors here in our market. It's not very different in Oregon either, in terms of the disparity between retail outlets and producer processors.
Yeah, I had to stop growing personally once prices wholesale dropped below $3 a gram, and I believe
That's a totally losing proposition. There's no point in growing, other than for sport, like for your own passion. But you're spending money.
Outdoors,
you're spending money you know how to spend.
I can buy better product, if I'm going to do it indoors and spend at least $3 a gram. If outdoors is way different, this article talks about, outdoor cultivation versus indoor, and says that the majority of California and Oregon supply is cultivated outdoors. It's not the case throughout the U.S. So while more cultivation overall is done outdoors at 44%, and then there's greenhouses at about 30%. So it's all about the pricing, right? I mean, you can definitely taste, the difference, I think, between outdoors, more earthy, indoor. You're going to have a lot more of the terpene profile potentially. But ultimately, this is all about money. This is all about price. And so there's a lot of capital being kind of pushed off to the side because of the speculation that we saw in Canada. That bubble is going to pop. And I think when investors look at Washington businesses, unfortunately, those that didn't utilize first mover advantages are going to be discounted from a valuation perspective. They're going to be looked at as a value investment opportunity rather than a speculative one. And we can already see some of that as Molson Coors stocks drops down. We're talking about Anheuser-Busch InBev lowering its guidance on the next several quarters as sales volumes slump across the world. So they're attempting to stop the hemorrhaging of sales. So Molson Coors is looking at brewed beverages, including tea, coffee, beer, alcoholic wine, alcoholic coffee, like all this stuff. So of course, this article even mentions cannabis. It says that with marijuana sales up across the U.S. and alcohol sales moving lower, the consumer with insurmountable debts in the next recession will be smoking their financial woes away, opposed to drinking themselves to sleep, seen in prior economic downturns. Every bear market is different. And there is, during a bear market, people do go to sin stocks, or whether it's a defensive stock or they're just vices, right? Alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, all of those have an inverse relationship during an economic downturn. And when you listen to Warren Buffett, when he says be greedy when others are selfish, and be selfish when others are greedy, something to that effect, you can see that Berkshire Hathaway has more cash on hand than Apple and Google. So they always expect a recession when there's cash on hand. They want to be able to have that opportunity to be able to buy things when those values come down. And there will be a massive correction, not only commercial real estate, but those MSOs are going to feel the pain. MedMen expect it. Wait for it. But in residential real estate, we're going to see a massive correction in a lot of things. The automotive industry is going to be totally ruined. The student loans are going to default. And so with that comes a wave of opportunity. I believe fully that cannabis stocks will see a massive speculation, if not even just parabolic, as people reallocate their portfolios and just dive into cannabis. It's going to be pension funds. It's going to be everyone else they're going to need a return on their investment, and they're not going to know where else to go.
I mean, it's a topic that politicians are campaigning on for the 2020 election cycle here in the United States. Cannabis is going to be legalized at the national level sometime soon. And that's going to, obviously green light and both ring a starting bell and ring a death knell for different people, depending on who you are. If you're legacy market, that's probably the death knell. If you're local regional cannabis market and you're not at the top 5% of the producer processors in your state, then it's probably a death knell. That next 10 to 70% will all get transacted, and they'll have exits, and they'll be bought, and there'll be some money made out of those businesses, but most of those players will all wash away and be turned over and just literally go away. But we were talking about the salient point that I couldn't find that you mentioned at the beginning, which was indoor versus outdoor, prices of indoor versus outdoor, prices to cultivate indoor versus outdoor. And I'd like to point out that I think there's going to be a interesting reckoning that needs to happen to the commercial cannabis industry with regards to something that nobody's really talking about, but they need to. And that's like all these hype strains, all this wrapper weed that's out there that we see on Instagram, that's like all the wedding cakes and the Skittles and the cookies and stuff that looks nutty, that looks like the best stuff you've ever seen in your life. These overweight, crazy, giant nugs, fat nugs, like size of people's heads. That cannabis is not regular cannabis. And all those strains are being grown without exception using PGRs, right? PGRs are a growth hormone regulator, all right? Plant growth regulating chemical. They're hormones usually. These are the GMOs that aren't allowed in a lot of our food agricultural crops, but are still approved for nutrition lines in cannabis industry. They're employed widely. They're expensive, so not everybody uses them for their lines. But if a grower is willing to go there, it's basically like putting your plants on steroids, and you get product that looks a lot like that. They're dense nugs. It gives a great bag appeal. A lot of times they look and smell better than anything you've ever seen. But I feel like if consumers really understood what that was all about, a lot of the products that are presently ruling in Washington, Oregon, and California in particular would have to find a way to address that if they really want to call themselves clean growers, and if they really want to call themselves, safe products. Like these are things that, in my opinion, lower the healthful benefits of consuming cannabis. At the end of the day, we're all cannabis users, and if you're combusting cannabis in your lungs daily for years or decades at a time, like many of us have been, a question of what went into the plant during the growth cycle of the plant kind of is relevant to whether or not I should be smoking that plant, in my opinion.
We're seeing a lot of products that are being taken off the shelf. There's a local program here called the OK program, and every month they'll just do a random test and pull products off the shelf and test it. Washington State does not have the best of testing requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're seeing, Eagle 20 last November, mold in joints. And even just this month, there were several recalls. So we have a lot of recalls due to a lot of reasons, none of which are GMOs. And I kind of stay away from soy because 90% of soy is owned by Monsanto and Bayer crops.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a GMO. And yet, I'm going after the next hot strain or cultivar because, somebody spliced that together and made a GMO product. And I'm all over it.
Yep. And I mean, I don't mean to, like scaremonger over using a GMO term, a term like that. But I feel like it's interesting and it's important for people to understand. And I don't think we're here going to reach a whole bunch of people that aren't super aware of at least to some level of what I'm talking about right there with that. Hopefully we've got, a audience that's already tracking on a lot of, higher level cannabis topics and for themselves in their personal lives, what they're consuming. I don't chase THC percentages. I don't chase, weight or thickness of nugs. I love a good smell. And if what you pull out of the bag or out of the jar smells good to me, I get delighted every time. But in terms of my personal choices, I would much rather, between you and me, a lot of times I am honored when somebody breaks out their homegrown with their, loose girlfriend trim, that just is like, yeah, this is just what we grew this year. And my girlfriend trims it up, but she doesn't really pay attention because she hates to do it, and we watch Jeopardy while we do it, and this is what it looks like, and it's like narfy looking, but it smells great and it smokes wonderful and it's got the heart. we know we're moving to a time where we'll have a little less of that moving forward than we had in the past. We're going to be a little bit further removed from our producers than we have been in the past, and that's just the way it's going to be for most consumers, But on the flip side, more people get to know cannabis in their lives. Cannabis is incredibly beneficial for most folks to use in so many myriad diverse ways. There's as many uses for it as there are hours in the day. And so on the balance, it's a good thing. And I do just hope that, we'll all see our way through it together. You mentioned Bear a few minutes ago. Bear's another one who they filed for a patent, I think, this year, or got one awarded for a cannabis strain for their own CBD hemp. So, so that to me was, if I'm not, I could try to drag up a browser and see if
I think that's going to be a topic for another day. That's why people go to Baked and Awake, as well as maybe a new segment we're going to have here weekly with you back on. So to correlate this, before we wrap this up, there's an ongoing lawsuit where a farmer in Oregon is suing for $44 million because he wasn't given the right seeds. So I know from Mike West of Embark that the latitude makes a huge difference. And so people in the Caribbean trying to go to Jamaica, or people even in Oregon, you guys could just, switch seeds and maybe it will grow in that region on that latitude. It's very important that people are completely not looking into. And so there is some importance about genetics and being modified to fit a particular region and be as effective as possible. But I do find it interesting from a crop loss insurance standpoint, risk analysis and all of that. That's a whole nother topic as well.
So did that farmer end up having terrible results, then looked into what his supplier actually provided him, and it wasn't the phenotype that he thought he was supposed to be getting in the first place, and it was totally unsuccessful there for him?
Yeah, you're going to have to check the Talking Hedge.
Okay.
With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. I want to thank my guest, Stephen Cominski of Baked and Awake.
Thank you very much for having me, Josh. I had a great time hanging out with you, brother.
Appreciate you being on the podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.